So what are the barriers holding us back? Well, the first one is the most boring subject in the world. And so I hope you have some coffee there. I'm glad I spoke after the break so you had a chance to recharge the caffeine. But it's called monetary policy. When you say monetary policy, Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, foreign exchange rates, Alan Greenspan, I mean, the eyelids get heavy. Steve, stay awake. You still got half hour to go on this thing. And it is boring. And the amazing thing is, it's the one subject that intimidates people. I mean, people, even Washington, will master the most arcane things, but when it comes to monetary policy, So that's why the Federal Reserve, for example, even though it's a creature of Congress, has less formal oversight than do our intelligence agencies. Bernanke does not have to testify on Capitol Hill. He does it for political reasons, to keep them calm. And you can see it in the questioning. 2/3 of the questions you can tell are put together by staff. The questioner has no idea really what he or she is asking and no idea what the answer is, but hey, you got to go through the charade. So before I go any further on this, let me just give you a reward in advance from what I'm about to do to you and give you a travel tip. If you ever find yourself in an airplane, in coach, middle seat, on the runway, watching your life pass away, want a little bit of elbow room with your seatmates, start talking about monetary policy. If they don't remove you from the plane, they'll cut you a wide berth. But putting all the jargon aside, monetary policy is like an automobile or a truck. You can have a magnificent vehicle, but if you don't have sufficient fuel, you're going to stall. Too much fuel, you flood the engine. Right amount, you have a chance to move the thing. Same is true of an economy. If a central bank, in this case the Federal Reserve, does not create enough money to meet the natural needs of the marketplace, you're going to stall the thing. If the Fed creates too much money, you get the economic equivalent of flooding the engine. Right amount, you have a chance to grow, a chance to move forward. Long story short, since the early part of the last decade, the Fed has been on a bender. All creating money, then undermining the dollar, sterilizing money, all over the place. If the Fed was driving, it would be arrested 50 times a day for drunk driving. Just absolutely berserk. And by the way, I was telling somebody earlier, all these QEs. I was in Britain a few months ago, and somebody reminded me there the QE stands for Queen Elizabeth. This fellow suggested instead of calling these monetary expansions QEs, call them Titanics. Titanic 1, Titanic 2, Titanic 3. Much more accurate description. But what the Fed has done by undermining the dollar has created huge distortions in the economy. I mean, for example, there's 0% interest rates. That sounds great, 0%. But think of it. The Fed is arbitrarily, capriciously lowering the price of credit. And most of you, when you suppress prices, when you put on price controls, you get less of the thing. You put on rent control, you'll get less rental units. And so think of what the Fed has done. By suppressing the price of credit, it's totally distorted the credit markets. Government will get theirs, big companies will get theirs, but until recently, smaller businesses, unincorporated businesses, households had very uncertain lines of credit. You see the pricing today. Does anyone really believe that a 10-year Treasury should yield, given the finances of the U.S. government, 1.7%, 1.8%, or a 30-year, 3%? Under these circumstances, 30 years out? No way. Do you believe that junk bonds, high-yield bonds, whatever name you want to give to it, should yield 5%? No way. And when you distort the market like that, it suppresses the creation and use of credit, distorts the allocation of credit, and that's why you have the paradox today of what the Fed has done. It's printed up all this money and then brought it back into the Fed, like putting water in a reservoir. Banks don't mind. They get the money. They get 0.25% found money, almost free money, but it's all sitting sterilized in the Fed balance sheet. That's why we haven't had a wild inflation yet. We did get the housing bubble, Never would have had the housing bubble if the Fed hadn't ginned up the money in the early part of the last decade. By the way, when the Fed goes off the rails, everyone goes off the rails to one extent or another. All the currencies get affected. Even the Swiss had to throw in the towel a few months ago because they were getting overwhelmed by it. So it just undoes everything, undoes everything. So what the Fed has done today is made it very hard in the last couple of years for small businesses to get a reliable flow of credit. Now, others have stepped in the breach. That's one of the virtues of American capital markets, is if something's gummed up, somebody else will try to find a way to get around it. But only recently has that begun to ease a little bit. That's why we hadn't had much job creation. Small businesses, we know, create most of the new jobs. But if they're deprived of oxygen, they're not going to run very fast or very hard. So the Fed has gummed up the pricing of credit. And to this day, nobody calls them on it. And very few or more and more are realizing what he's done is contractionary. He says he's expansionary, but he's contractionary. Remember what we said about the Soviet Union. There's the old saying, healthcare is free, but you can't get any. Just remember that phrase when the next time you hear about another round of a QE or Titanic and the money is sterilized. So this gets the whole purpose of money. Totally bore you. Money is simply a means of doing transactions. That's all it is. Makes transactions easier, buying and selling easier. We do it a zillion times a day. Now, in the old days, before we had money, we had barter, which was very inefficient, very hard to invest. I mean, 3,000 years ago, if I sold an ad in Forbes, how would I get paid? Perhaps with a herd of goats. Let's say I wanted to buy iPads for our writers 3,000 years ago. So I go to the Apple store 3,000 years ago with my goats. Store owner says, I don't want goats, I need sheep. So then I have to figure out how I swap the goats for sheep. Perhaps have to hire a sheep herder to make sure the wolves don't eat them. Sheep herder wants to be paid in wine. I have red wine, he wants white wine. Just very inefficient. Imagine if we had barter today. Imagine going to an ATM and trying to deposit a cow. Or if you're in Kentucky, withdrawing a horse from the ATM. It does not work. So that's why money was invented. It started with coins in Lydia, then Athens, helped Athens become a great commercial and cultural center. Why coins at the beginning? Because it had intrinsic value, so it was easy to go across borders and do commerce across borders. Evolved into different kinds of coins, paper, now blips on a computer. But all it does is make transactions easier. So you determine what you get when you sell something in return. You don't have to take barter. You can get in effect a chit and figure out what you want in return. Makes investing infinitely easier. So if you understand that, you understand that money is ultimately created by the marketplace, by you doing transactions. And all a central bank should be is the equivalent of a fuel injector, making sure it does it right. So just as you have fixed weights and measures in the marketplace, makes it easy. You buy a pound of hamburger, 16 ounces. You build a 3,000-foot house, square feet. It's 12 inches in a foot. You don't float the ruler. Imagine what your life would be like if the Fed did the clocks, what it does to the dollar. Imagine if we floated the clock. So you have 60 minutes an hour one day, 32 the next, 96 the next. You soon have to have hedges, derivatives, futures to figure out how many hours you're working. Well, let's say you hire somebody for $20 an hour. You have to figure out, now is that a New York hour, a Canadian hour, Bangladesh hour? Or let's say you're baking a cake. It says 45 minutes for the batter. And you have to figure, is that an inflation-adjusted minute? It just makes life very difficult. So the more unstable a currency is, the more distortion you get in investment. If you can't trust the value of the currency, what you get when you do your transactions, what does that mean? You become more concerned with preserving what you have instead of looking to the future. You all know present prices and equities and others are supposed to reflect future income streams discounted to the present. But if you don't know what the income streams are going to be worth, very hard to determine what you get at the present. You make an investment, may come down 5 years from now, pay off 5 years. Is that going to be a 100-cent dollar, 80-cent dollar, 20-cent dollar? When anyone ever asks me, should I invest in gold or precious metals, I know something is wrong. Why in the world would you invest in precious metals unless you're a jeweler or a miner? You only do it because you think it's a way of preserving what you have. And it might grow while other things are getting hurt by the uncertainty about the currency. So ultimately, where all this leads is will sound astounding, but in a few years, I think we're going to do what we haven't done since the 70s, but we did do for the first 180 years of this country's existence, and that is the dollar will be relinked to gold. People say, oh my God, is that going to have piles of gold? What happens to Fort Knox and all that kind of stuff? No, it's very simple. It's so simple that when you explain it to people, they say, oh, it can't be that simple. It must be complicated. I mean, monetary policy is supposed to be like high physics. No, it is not. Let's say we pick a price, $1,300 an ounce. Why gold? Well, because gold keeps its intrinsic value better than anything else in the world, better than silver, copper, chairs, or anything, for a whole host of reasons. You can't destroy it, it's malleable, all that other stuff. Only about 1.5%, 2% increase in supply each year, so it's rare but not too rare. All the things like North Star, Polaris, you can fix it. Not perfect, but the best we have in the world. So let's say you fix it at $1,300. Gold, remember, keeps its intrinsic value. All you're doing is using it as a measuring rod against the dollar. You don't have to own 1 ounce of gold to do this. So you pick $1,300. Then each day at the Fed, somebody once said, a Nobel Prize-winning economist once said, if you do it right, a monkey could do it. But let's say high school students. I don't want to hurt the self-esteem of the Fed too much. But you look at the price. If it goes much above $1,300, you have the open market, you have the desk, in effect, extinguish money. And if it goes below $1,300, you have it created. It's like a yardstick. You just keep it within that narrow range, 1 or 2% above or below, and that's it. You don't have to own the stuff. They owned it in the 19th century because it evolved that way. But it's like political systems. The political system we had when we became independent, very different from the one we have today, even though it's based on the consent of the governed. So monetary policy, it's huge, intimidating, but if you don't get it right, we're going to have a lot of trouble. Eventually, we will. Now, a few other things that stand in the way, and then we'll get to the Q&A. Another one easily understood is taxes. One thing about taxes, and I know you understand this, but it's amazing how many don't. You feel almost like a simpleton having to explain it, but sometimes simple things get overlooked. Taxes just don't raise revenue for government. They're also a price and a burden. So the tax you pay on income is the price you pay for working. Tax on profit, the price you pay for being successful. Tax on capital gains, the price you pay for taking risks that work out. Proposition's a very simple one. When you lower the price of good things like productive work, risk-taking success, you get more of those good things. Raise the price, you get less of those good things. So all this jabber in Washington about, oh, we need to raise taxes, we got a severe financial crisis, yada, yada, yada. Absolute BS. We should be looking to lower the burden on people so they can produce more. It's the only way we dig ourselves out of this hole. And so in terms of taxation, what you see in Europe, we haven't seen that kind of behavior since the early 1930s, where governments deliberately raised taxes in the face of a declining economy. Greece has done it too fairly well. Spain raised their top rate to 52%, raised their VAT, value-added tax equivalent national sales tax to 21. Italy is doing the same thing. Portugal, the same thing. France, as you know, wants to raise their top tax rate to 75 and their top capital gains tax to 75. And then they want to express astonishment that people move next door to Belgium. I mean, Belgium, not known as a tax haven, but hey, 50 is better than 75. Bizarre. Japan raised their top rate to 55, doubled their national sales tax from 5 to 10%, raising capital gains taxes, inheritance taxes, payroll tax, and they wonder why their economy is stuck in neutral and has been for 20 years.